Senator from Iowa.
President, members of the Senate, it won't be long. Of course, it might be longer than it appears to be, but at least this week we were supposed to be considering the budget resolution, and hopefully before the week's out we will. It's been 4 years since the Senate has passed a budget. The Senate deficit majority has been void of leadership on this matter. While American families and businesses compile a budget each and every year, the Senate deficit majority has shirked its responsibility. Producing a budget has even been called, quote unquote, foolish by the Democrat majority leader. After years of record deficits and debt, I think the American people disagree with the fact that the Senate has not taken up a budget for the last 3 years, even though the law requires every year for the Senate to adopt a budget. Well, thankfully, this year it looks like we're going to have this debate and adopt a budget. Now, while we're about to debate a budget resolution a few hours or a few days away, the President hasn't even proposed his budget for consideration. The Budget Committee, of which I'm a member, did not hear from a single administration witness in preparation of this budget that the Senate will be working on. That's a new historical low for which the Obama administration can take credit. House Budget Chairman Ryan has produced a budget. Chairwoman Murray produced a budget. It's quite remarkable that the President has yet to submit a budget, even though the law requires it be done by February the 4th. The President plans to release his budget the week of April 8th, 2 months overdue. This will be the first time a president has failed to submit a budget until after the House and the Senate have acted. Once again, on fiscal issues, the President is leading from behind. He set a new low for fiscal responsibility. During the past 4 years, we've spent well beyond our means. The gross federal debt has increased by $6 trillion as a result. Now, unless we change course, we'll add another $9 trillion over the next 10 years. The gross debt is now, and maybe by then, will still be larger than the U.S. economy. It's approaching levels where economists agree deficits and debt are causing slower economic growth. During the past 4 years, we witnessed President Obama's theory of economic stimulus. We saw a massive expansion of government and deficit spending. President Obama and the Democrat leadership in Congress pushed spending up to 25% of the economy in recent years, and an $800 billion stimulus bill was a big part of that. That bill was pushed through in the name of economic growth. It was supposed to keep unemployment below 8%. It didn't keep unemployment below 8% because, in fact, the legislation written was more an appropriation bill than a stimulus bill. So it didn't create the sustainable job growth that it was supposed to. It was one big, ineffective spending bill. The economic growth it was supposed to stimulate never materialized. Now we're dealing with the deficit and the debt caused by that failed stimulus bill. Despite this failure, the President and the Senate deficit majority seem even more fixated on growing government. According to economic policies of President Obama, government needs to grow even bigger to help our economy, and it's not going to work. The overriding belief of the administration is that economic growth will only come through private wealth confiscation that supports even bigger, more intrusive government. If government just gets a little bigger and a little more involved, in every facet of our economy and of our lives, that will surely increase the economic prosperity of Americans. Right? Of course not. The problem is raising taxes only extracts private capital from job creators and small businesses. And small businesses happen to be where 70% of the new jobs are created. So if you want to create new jobs, why would you take capital out of a sector where job creation can occur and bring it to government, where it is spent wastefully by often inefficient and bloated bureaucracies? The higher taxes are robbing the unemployed of needed jobs. The government it supports does not create economic growth or self-sustaining jobs. This 4-year spending binge that we've been on has led to deficits that crowd out private investment that would otherwise be used to grow the economy and to create jobs. Government doesn't create self-sustaining jobs. Government only creates government jobs. The private sector creates jobs where wealth is created in the private sector then. It's the responsibility of the government to create an environment for job growth, to create opportunity for entrepreneurs that then create jobs. And instead of raising taxes, what this country needs is more taxpayers. And you get more taxpayers by reducing unemployment. And you do that by keeping money in the private sector. And besides that, government can provide this environment by instituting the rule of law, protecting property rights, a patent system, among many other things that I could probably mention. Government consumes wealth. It does not create wealth. Through economic freedom, entrepreneurs and individuals are free to innovate and prosper. This budget fails to recognize these simple principles. The budget presented by the deficit majority makes no effort to reduce the deficits, reduce spending, balance the budget, or grow the economy. Instead, this budget seeks to grow government by taxing more and spending more. It's time that we all recognize that government exists to serve the needs of the people rather than people serving the needs of their government. There are some who believe that government is the only creator of economic prosperity. And if others have achieved success, they must be, by default, the cause of others' hardships. This type of class warfare, demagoguery as it is harmful to America and our future. It seeks and does divide America. The budget presented by the deficit majority is partisan business as usual. It would tax success by adding another $1 trillion. It increases government spending. It ignores the subject of our health care entitlements. And this whole approach is simply not good for advancing America's economy. It places no priority on ever bringing our budget into balance. The deficit majority speaks at length about growing the economy and creating a middle class, and their budget is perfectly backward. It does nothing to address economically harmful deficits and debt, the drag on the economy that they are, and it includes as much as $1.5 trillion in job-killing tax hikes. The majority claims that this revenue can be collected without harming the economy by closing loopholes. The fact is that regardless of how it's described, a $1.5 trillion tax increase will affect the middle class, harm the economy, and not create jobs. A $1.5 trillion tax hike, while economic growth is slow and unemployment remains at 7 7/10%, is a reckless formula further devastating the economy. Even worse, the tax increases will not be used to balance the budget. Higher taxes support even higher spending. This is the typical tax and spend budget. This budget was crafted as if we don't even have a spending problem or a debt crisis. This budget assumes everything is just fine and everything will work out if we simply proceed forward on the current path of tax and spend. This budget represents a missed opportunity. You don't have to take my word for it. Editorial writers across the country have made similar statements about this budget. A Washington Post editorial called it a complacent budget plan. They wrote that the majority budget fails to recognize the long-term fiscal problems. I'd like to quote, partisan in tone and complacent in subject. It scores points against Republicans and reassures the political liberal base, but deepens these senators' commitments to an unsustainable policy agenda. Further quoting, in short, this document gives voters no reason to believe that Democrats have a viable plan for or even a responsible public assessment of the country's long-term fiscal predicament, end quote. The Chicago Tribune had a similar thing to say in their editorial. They described it as a deficit of ambition. I quote, the Democrats, unfortunately, are feigning fiscal responsibility instead of practicing it. What is needed is a lot more ambition than the Murray plan reflects. If Democrats don't like the Republican plan for balancing the budget, they should produce their own. End of quote. Finally, USA Today editorial referred to the budget as a namby-pamby budget that underwhelms at every turn. Quote, the Murray budget neither balances the budget nor reins in entitlements. Its 1-to-1 ratio of spending to tax increases might sound balanced, but the spending cuts are not actual reductions. They are merely reductions in expected rate of growth. All this makes the Murray budget barely a Band-Aid, end of quote. And that 1-to-1 ratio that's quoted in the USA Today editorial reminds me, and let me explain, that's raise $1 of taxes for $1 of cuts. That reminds me the president's own program, own position on that stated just before the election in his meeting with the Des Moines Register editorial board, suggested that we raise taxes $1 and cut expenditures $2.50. So how do we go just before the president's elected from $2.50 reduction for every dollar increase to a 1-to-1 ratio now? I would hope that when the president submits his budget on April the 8th, that he sticks to that 2.5 to 1. I'm sure that we'll hear the term pro-growth applied to this budget when we hear from people speaking on the other side of the aisle. The only thing it can mean is growth in the size and scope of the federal government and growth in the national debt. We will also hear the term balanced. Please don't be fooled. The deficit majority is not speaking of a balanced budget. Their understanding of balance is higher taxes and higher spending. This budget does not tackle runaway spending. It raises taxes, but not to balance the budget, but to spend more and more. This budget will grow the government, harm economic growth, and increase debt. After 4 years of contemplating a budget resolution, I would have expected more fiscally responsible budget. The American people deserve much better. I suggest the absence of a quorum.